Chapter 118. By the time Alden finished cleaning up after himself, he was the last student left in the gym except for Maricel, who was talking animatedly to Fragment about what she had seen the other ground shapers doing at Earthbox. He headed toward the locker room, wondering how he was going to haul his exhausted body to North of North and if the recovery sauna was going to be powerful enough to save him. The sound of his own name made his hand pause just before he pushed on the door. He nudged it open a crack instead of shoving straight through. Like he's special or something. It's just catching balls. Winston. I only caught a glimpse, said Khan. But Waker throws so that you can barely see the things coming before they're on top of you. Catching them might not be impossible, but it's not like it would be easy. And the balls were throwing themselves back. It was great. Instructor Klein was mad because I kept looking over there instead of at him. And that's Jeffy. I hereby forgive you for making my plaid shirt smell like cheap body spray, Jeffy. Don't you want the instructors to help you when you're figuring something new out with your powers? Hoyu said coolly. This is a school. They are teachers. They teach. It's not that confusing. I'm going to buy more copper appliances for the apartment. It's not something new, Winston retorted. It's Catch. He's just a bee. And Big Little Snake was so focused on him toward the end of our session it wasn't even as hard to dodge as usual. It was new, idiot, Lexi snapped. If you actually paid attention to other people's abilities instead of getting jealous over stupid. Alden threw the door open and hurried in before Lexi could get himself into trouble. He pretended not to notice the hush that fell over everyone. The running showers were the only sound in the room. Alden smiled blithely around at them all and texted Hoyu. Make Lexi come with us to use the sauna today. Hoyu gave him a surprised look. You're good at making him do things, Alden said. I'll pay for the guest pass and the reservation. Line of asterisks. You can't keep saying, I guess we'll invite Khan instead, when you want me to agree to things, Lexi complained as they walked beside the busy street that ran between the edge of campus and North of North. I know what you're doing. It's not like I'm lying when I say it, said Hoyu. Khan and I get along. I really might have invited him instead. Why do you keep asking me to come here anyway? For your health and happiness. But today I insisted because Alden wanted you to come, too. Lexi looked back. Alden was several steps behind them. Why are you making me come to your grossly fancy potion-sniffing facility with you? And? Do you need one of us to carry your bag or something? No. I'm fine. I think I just pulled a muscle. Everywhere. Lexi rolled his eyes, and reached over to take his duffel from him. Thanks. Your ranks are so handy. And North of North isn't grossly fancy. It's a very good amount of fancy. Right, Hoyu? Exactly. A few minutes later, when they stepped into the gym, the girl who often guarded the lobby presented Lexi with a velvet gift bag full of swag in honor of his first visit. The smoothies and frozen yogurt are free, said Hoyu. The showers are big enough for 10 people. Spirit waxing might be real. Are you two trying to sell me a membership or what? In Alden's opinion, the place was more than worth the price of the membership that evening. What was that? He wondered while he stood under warm water in a rainfall shower. He remembered the feeling of his fingers, and his skill, wrapping around tennis balls he probably shouldn't have been able to catch. How was I doing it? What was it that happened? He didn't know. It was frustrating not to know but exciting to think that Bearer had something like that to show him. When he arrived at the sauna, there was nobody inside except for Lexi and Hoyu. Usually, there would be a few other people taking advantage of the potion-infused steam. But if you hung around for long enough you'd hit a patch or two when everyone else was gone. Alden's roommates were sitting on the bottom bench, their hands moving through the air as they worked with their interfaces. Lexi glanced at Alden, eyes lingering on the left side of his chest for a moment. It's not real, Hoyu whispered loudly as Alden sat down beside him. He got it because he wanted to look more mature than the rest of us. Hoyu, don't tell him the truth. I want everyone to think I'm a serious avowed. Sorry, said Hoyu. It's very, very real. He killed some people for a wizard, and the tattoo makes it so he can never reveal the locations of the bodies. That's right, said Alden. I'm a dangerous rabbit. Lexi looked at him. You might be. You do know I'm kidding about the murder, right? I know that. But what was with your reaction time in class today? Lexi asked. You were moving completely differently than you were a couple of weeks ago. Hoyu groaned. Lexi, you can't even relax and joke around with us for a second? Silence fell, then Lexi cleared his throat. Knock knock. Alden stared at him. Hoyu's eyes lit. Who's there? Alexei, Lexi muttered. He looked like he already regretted doing this. Alexei who? Hoyu asked. A lexicon is a kind of dictionary. Do you want to buy one? Hoyu's grin was huge. Alden thought he was probably wearing a similar expression. You have your own family knock-knock joke, he exclaimed. And he was brave enough to deliver it, too. Lexi. Con. It's perfect, Hoyu said. Lexi's face was way too red for the amount of time they'd been in the sauna. My dad made it up when we were little. He thinks it's hilarious. Can't I ask you about Jim now? I was going to answer you anyway. Alden shifted, trying to get comfortable. The two of them were watching him expectantly. This is hard. The parts of it I do think I understand would make me sound crazy. Oh, I could feel my goals aligning with my affixation better than usual. I suspect I was establishing my authority over reality more properly, and that was making the skill more effective in a number of ways that I can't quite grasp. Just wait. Stop running away. Come back, you guys. I don't want new roommates. I don't think I should have been catching some of those, he said instead. Most of those. When it comes to big snakes faster pitches, I don't usually have time to think. Left ankle. Right hip. Shoulder. It's more like yikes. Motion. Duck. He arched his back, trying to stretch it out. Also, I was very focused on my mindset. So I wasn't paying great attention to details. He was throwing them at least as fast as usual, right? Hoyu and Lexi exchanged a look. I was busy trying to beat Instructor Klein, Lexi said. But it was getting noteworthy toward the end of class, Hoyu told him. Not the speed of the individual pitches. He was throwing at what looked like his normal top speed for you. Alden nodded. Snake threw harder at some people than others, depending on what they were doing with their powers and how suited they were to playing high-speed dodgeball to begin with. But he was throwing a much larger number of pitches at you. For the last half of the session, he wasn't even giving you time to return one before the next was in the air. And he was throwing more multiples your way. You would have needed to be an avowed octopus to catch all of them. I've got to watch my footage. Before you do, Lexi said, let me ask, you didn't know, right? That you could catch something that was being used as a weapon against you. That was why you were so excited even with the first one? I'd never done it, Alden replied. Of course Big Snake isn't trying to hurt us for real, but it's a situation where both parties know his goal is to hit us, not pass the balls to us. So it was a decent test. A much better test than I expected. Alden had hoped it would be a first step towards sorting out his perception of incoming enemy projectiles. Only a baby step, he had thought, since it wasn't a perfect model of an actually dangerous situation. That was all. I ended up glimpsing something way different than I'd planned. I have practiced playing catch with my skill, but it was to get the hang of preserving objects instantly, instead of halting their momentum and then preserving. It wasn't like, you couldn't always do that. Lexi's face was intent. It's something you figure it out through trial and error? It actually took a lot of practice to be able to do it naturally every time. Could you tell when you were on the right track to getting it? Hoyu asked at once. How many times would you say you had to try? Lexi asked at the same time. You two definitely shouldn't use most of my experiences to judge your own progress. I learned a lot of what I know about my skill and my trait during a crisis. There were really unique pressures holding me back in some ways and driving me forward in others. They both looked embarrassed, which wasn't what Alden had wanted at all. I don't mind talking about it with you, he said hastily. He was surprised to realize that it was closer to a truth than a lie. Maybe it was only because he'd just heard them defending him when they didn't even know he was listening, but it was a relief, for a change, not to have that internal clench at the thought of possibly being asked a question about Thegund. He was sure it would be back when he was in a different mood, but for now. I played catch with Kibby all the time. She threw gravel. Small pointy rocks aren't the most pleasant things to catch, but that worked out for the best because it encouraged me to grab them with the right idea in mind instead of the wrong one. At the time, whenever someone tossed something to me, I had a feeling that I needed to stop it and get a good grip on it before I preserved it. And when feelings and intuition were all I had to go on instead of my authority sense, it made activating the skill exactly how I wanted to seem like rocket science. It was good they'd asked about this one, now that he thought about it. Instant preservation of moving objects was one of the few things he'd made progress with prior to gaining more deliberate control over his affixation. Practicing my way out of it worked. I got it right more and more often. Soon enough, even without his expanding senses changing how he understood his magic, halting the rocks properly would have become a knack in the normal way for a human of out, he was sure. Just one of those things you could do thoughtlessly once you'd gotten the hang of it, the magical equivalent of riding a bicycle. Now it's not hard at all. The sound of the door opening drew his attention. Lutvilla walked into the room wearing a towel around his waist and drinking an orange smoothie. I see, he said, wafting steam dramatically toward his nose with one hand, then slurping from his drink. So this is where the spoiled people do their homework. Isn't it indecent for you to call someone spoiled? Lexi asked. Lut. Hoyu said. What are you doing here? Alden invited me. Sorry I'm late. I had to make sure I tried all the free samples. He was peering into the tiny cauldron on the pedestal at the center of the room. He didn't have his patch on, and from this angle, in all the steam, it was impossible to tell he had a false eye. You might want to drink the smoothie fast, said Alden. There's no food allowed in here. When other people show up, they'll glare at you. Luke looked over to answer. Hey. You have a tattoo. Before Alden could respond, Lute was right beside him examining it. Does it go around the side? It looks like it goes around the side. Alden lifted his arm. Ooh. A mysterious triangle. Alden snorted. You should have said you had one. Then Luke frowned. Now mine is even dumber. You probably got yours doing a deal with a wizard, and mine's a fancy letter V my grandmother designed back in the Dark Ages. Under slightly different circumstances, an ancestral tattoo would actually be awesome, said Alden. Yeah. I guess. But that's dependent on your ancestors being awesome. He sat down. So now Hoyu and Lexi just need to get summoned for something serious or secret, and we'll all be inked. That's not on my to-do list for the near future, Hoyu said. Mine either. Fine. But Alden and I are getting ahead of you. He sucked on his straw. So. Now we sit around and recover together. We're recovering from an intense MPE class, said Lexi. I don't know what you think you're recovering from. I'll have you know I used the stairs instead of the elevators to get to all my lessons today. Okay, said Alden. I'm glad you both came. But now I really do have to review the video to see if I can figure out what I was actually doing with my skill earlier. There's entertainment? Luke asked. Can't I watch? I don't mind. You don't have your own homework? My homework is boring. They all ended up watching, even Lexi, who claimed he needed to study his own efforts far more than Alden's. It was always strange to view the gym footage. The first time Alden had seen his body in high definition from every angle, wearing the unitard and doing the kinds of things they did in MPE, he hadn't recognized himself. In ways both good and bad. His reaction had included important concerns like, is my accent slightly different than it used to be? Is my hair funny? My face gets so red when I'm working out, and it makes so many expressions. I bet everyone thinks I'm a creepy tomato head. And there were some more positive observations. Watching himself do magic was incredible. He looked so much more like a superhuman when he used his skill than he'd realized. Alden from a year ago would have thought the guy on the video had cool powers. On top of that, he looked athletic, which was gratifying. He was aware that he was in great shape. He could feel it. But seeing himself move in ways he couldn't have before was still exciting. And as for moving in ways he couldn't, or, rather, shouldn't. As they hit the 15-minute mark of the recording, Alden watched through his interface as two projectiles came toward him in rapid succession. He paused it. Lexi, double miss. He was typing in their roommate chat so that they wouldn't bother the man and woman who'd come to relax on the benches across from them. Hoyu, single miss. Loot, you're going to get hit in the shoulder and the knee. Every now and then they were playing this guessing game, trying to decide whether or not Alden could make the catches. Alden, double miss. These ones are too fast. He started the video. The him from just a short while ago threw his body forward to grab the first ball with his right hand before it hit his shin, and then, even as he raised his arm to send the ball back to Instructor Waker, he was snapping up and twisting his spine around to catch the second ball with his left hand even though it had already gone past him. What the hell? Thought Alden, thrilled and confused at the same time. Damn, said Loot from right beside him. You're so much better than I imagined you being. Alden, hey. Hoyu, that's right. Give him the annoyed font. Loot, seriously, though. You look like you're using the self-mastery word chain even though you're not. Lexi, did your skill give you some kind of temporary enhancement? Hoyu, a speed boost maybe. That would be amazing. Alden doubted that was it, but he didn't know what it was either. He rewound and watched again in slow motion. Incoming fastballs that should have hit him one right after the other. Catch. Release. Catch. Release. Smooth as silk. He watched it twice more at regular speed. Then in slow motion. Then one more time, focusing on the fingers of his right hand as they manipulated the ball into the correct position for the return. Alden, I don't think my body's moving faster than I'm capable of. But I was concentrating so hard on intercepting the pitches with my magic that I lost my sense of self-preservation a little. The all three looked at him. Lexi, what does that mean? Alden, I tuned out everything else. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have twisted around that hard and fast to catch a ball normally. I'm getting whiplash just watching myself. It explains why I'm this sore. There was your normal best, and then there was your I've managed to convince myself that catching the ball is the purpose of my existence, and I'm too busy feeling my authority to notice if things hurt or not best. Loot, don't your super stylish turtleneck jumpsuits stop you from injuring yourselves? They all turned to look at him. Hoyu narrowed his eyes. So you think our superhero suits are stylish? Lexi, they don't prevent self-inflicted muscle strain unless you're doing something completely insane. I might not be moving that much faster, Alden thought as he watched himself miss one pitch then catch another. But I sure am moving in the right direction more often than not. And he moved more and more correctly the longer it went on. By the last few minutes of class, even the balls he missed were bare misses. To start with, some of them had caught him completely by surprise, but at the end, he was always reaching for the spot they were coming toward with one hand or the other. Big Snake seemed to have decided that the harder catches were helping the most. He had even started throwing a few of them wild, instead of playing the villain and always aiming for Alden's body. Your eyes, Lexi said as they approached the end of the video. Then he seemed to realize he'd spoken aloud, and he looked over at the other Sana users apologetically. Hoyu, I was going to say that too. His visual processing must be really great. That's not it. Alden remembered the feel of catching. He didn't remember seeing the balls coming at him very often at all. Lexi, no. Look at his face again during that fast series of throws earlier. Loot, the one where Teacher Snake hit him like 15 times just for fun? Hoyu, I don't think it was for fun. I think he just decided to try out a bunch of different things to see how Alden reacted to them. That ball that hit the floor right in front of him and exploded probably couldn't have been hand-caught by anyone in our class. It was an experiment. Alden was backing up the video to find the part Lexi meant. It was an absurd-looking moment. If he hadn't been so lost in what was going on with his skill right then, the sight of almost 20 inbound objects would have made him throw up his hands in defeat. But apparently, when he was this deep into it, he was all business. He'd watched his body and his hands last time. He knew he would miss almost all of these pitches. There was no way he could have caught them. Now, following Lexi's prompting, he watched his face. "I look exhausted." He was gasping. "I look calm." He remembered that. "I look shocked." He zoomed in on his face even closer. "What the hell am I doing?" He caught a ball and returned it. A dozen others hit him or whizzed over his head. He caught a second and returned it. He lunged sideways, so that his fingers brushed the final one in the volley, but they couldn't close over it in time. Alden replayed the scene again. "Did I close my eyes?" he exclaimed. "Maybe you can hear the balls with your ears," Hoyu whispered. "Lexi, are you reading Instructor Waker's mind? Not using your eyes makes you 100% cooler. I'm perpetually 50% cooler than the rest of you, so I should know." "Oh my god, Jim Alden was temporarily psychic," said Alden. Hoyu laughed. "You do know Jim is you, don't you? Lexi, you all remember we're not supposed to be loud in here, right?" "Alden, how did I catch them with my eyes closed?" Lexi blinked at him. "Loot, are you seriously asking us to tell you how your own powers work?" "Hoyu, maybe you just remembered where all the balls were and caught a couple that way." "Could that have been it? With that many heading at him, a couple of lucky catches would still have been too lucky." "Lexi, that wasn't it. Zoom out so you can see yourself and Instructor Waker at the same time." Alden did. Big Snake threw the huge volley, and then followed it up with a few more. "The last one," Lexi texted. "The one your fingers barely touched. He threw that one right after you shut your eyes. You couldn't possibly have seen it, but you still went for it." He was right. And since Alden hadn't been reading Big Snake's mind. "Loot, you guys, look at his face. He's smiling at his own footage." Of course Alden was smiling. How could he not be? This was a part of his skill he hadn't thought to look for. He was always so focused on preserving the burden and using the preserved burden in different ways and finding the limits of the preservation. He had needed a broader view. Even though he'd known his skill was special, he still hadn't been looking at it through a wide enough lens. A skill for a lifetime. One called the bearer of all burdens. During my last affixation, I even took the defogging package she recommended. I enhanced bearer with the sensitivity option. I assumed all it could do for me right now was help me see and feel enchantments so that I could use the new skill facet properly. Because that was what we were talking about using it for at the time. He had never wondered if it could do anything for solid objects. Nobody had ever entrusted him with an object he didn't more or less know the location of. Until today. His eyes and brain hadn't been quite fast enough to direct his body toward the burdens he wanted to bear, so his skill had stepped up to the plate. Closing his eyes once he had fallen all the way into the effort. I was just letting go of a less capable sense so that another one could do its job better. Line of asterisks, fine. Hoyu was slurping up noodles at the kitchen table. "You're right. Ramen noodles are good with minestrone. In the absence of a professional chef and a full kitchen, ramen noodles are good with everything," Luke replied. "Alden, you're about to trip over the ottoman. Again." "Stop talking so much," thought Alden, halting his slow, blindfolded walk through the apartment. "It's making it hard for me to sense my soup." Somewhere in this place there was a mug of minestrone that Hoyu had told him to preserve. They'd come up with this scheme on the way back from the sauna. Lute had asked if Alden could practice his newly discovered ability by using it like a much more limited version of a lost thing finder skill, like Romanville had. Hoyu had volunteered to be his entruster. And Lexi had suggested they use supper as a motivator, since Alden's stomach was growling. Now he was wearing his sleep mask, and he was trying to find both his food and the particular mental state that had allowed him to catch pitches he couldn't see. "Stop sniffing for it," Lexi said. "The whole apartment smells like minestrone. You're not going to get it that way." "I'm not doing it on purpose." My nose is just inhaling more than usual on its own. He paused. Hoyu, you know where the mug is, right? I don't know if this will work if neither one of us knows where the thing I'm looking for is hiding. I know where the mug is, Hoyu confirmed. And I want you to preserve it. It's getting cold. It'll taste bad. You're ruining the supper I made. Pressure him more, Luke said. I'll be depressed if that mug is still full of cold soup and soggy ramen in the morning. And you'll starve to death. Too much pressure, said Alden, fumbling his way out of the living area. I'm going to my room. Maybe I can sense the soup better from in there. Okay, he thought, after he'd closed his door and pulled off the mask. Let's do this right. He went to kneel on his learning cushion and consider everything he knew and everything he suspected. First of all, he told himself, it wasn't a neat little trick. So don't let yourself think of it that way. Catching things with his eyes closed was neat. And it did seem like a fun party trick. But when he'd actually been doing it, his intentions had been more serious. I started thinking of myself as the bearer of all burdens instead of Alden. That's a little embarrassing now that I'm not so deeply lost inside my own affixation. But the effects of it couldn't be denied. It wasn't only that he'd been letting his magic lead his hands to the tennis ball's locations. He'd also been so efficient about it. The more he'd watched the video, the clearer it had become. In the last 3 or so minutes of class, he hadn't just been catching more balls, he'd been going for the best ones. He'd obviously started to get a sense for which ones he could actually reach in time. If being in that headspace had worked once, it would work again. He just had to find a way to get himself there. He slowed his breathing and let his eyelids fall shut. I should take a look at myself. I should do it like I mean it. He went backward in his mind, all the way to a better learning cushion in a worse place. Backward to the soft voice of an Ertonen kindergarten teacher and the achingly hopeful presence of a grieving girl who kept reaching for a learning partner so that she wouldn't be alone in the chaos anymore. Back to the moment when he'd first returned the friendly pat. There was a spot where the universe made room for Alden. A spot that was him. And when he finally found himself, I have the authority to move here. He delivered a wizardy fist bump for the first time in months. He sent it rippling out like a tiny, undirected pulse since there was no Kibi here to receive it. I can move like this. But not all of me. He remembered the excitement, satisfaction, and joy of that first deliberate exercise of his authority. And the inevitable horror. Hi, he thought at the rest of himself. How's it going? I know you're me, too. It was unpleasant to think of himself and his entirety, so often, too often. He suspected, he divided it. He pretended that he was his free authority, and his bound was more like an attachment. A useful one he couldn't extricate himself from. But still an attachment. That's a big self-directed loving lie. He sighed and let go of that lie for now. He knew how to. Denial was a luxury that his last affixation had stripped from him in a profound way, so it wasn't like he could ever really trick himself into forgetting his true nature. It was just an uncomfortable thing to fully acknowledge in a quiet moment like this. Accepting that I was mostly the bearer of all burdens, and only a little bit free, didn't feel that bad earlier when I was focused on doing my job right. The bearer of all burdens could not fist bump Kibi. He could not use an Oriot. He would never make an ice pop or light a promise stick. The bearer's infinite futures had been severed, for the sake of single purpose. I could bear the hell out of some burdens. Now. Where was Hoyu? They were close enough to each other right now that Alden was sure he could have sensed his roommate with a part of himself that was free. He had never tried it for a host of reasons. And anyway, it was an entirely different kind of sensing than bearer used. There. That wait. Judging by the direction, Hoyu was still in the kitchen. My target has entrusted me with a mug of soup. It's true that it's not the most meaningful thing I've ever been charged with protecting, but it's still been placed under my care. Nothing happened. I'm not feeling it like I was in gym. He wasn't falling into his role as naturally as he had earlier. Too many thoughts running through his head. Too many desires outside of his purpose. Less urgency. Maybe if the soup was in terrible danger. He chuckled. I'm super distractible when I'm hungry, sore, and tired. What else can I do? He remembered the way the skill had felt more alive as he aligned with it. Just pick some feature of the skill I know how to access and give it deliberate attention. Maybe that will put me in the zone. He focused on the targeting ability. I don't usually think about you or work on you much. I haven't bothered to conceive of you as something more interesting than a button on a machine yet. How ungrateful of me. You stayed fixed on Kibby for months without ever failing. I wanted you and needed you, but I haven't been appreciating what you do. Alden tried to think about what this part of him was, what it truly was. He thought of it as a small fraction of his power, and that wasn't wrong. But as he explored it, he found that there was something fundamental about it. This piece of the affixation runs through everything else bearers, like wires or the roots of a tree. He was enjoying the origami metaphor for other parts of his skill and he felt like he should keep it consistent, so. Paper roots? You could twist paper into root shapes, so that wasn't the most ridiculous thing. But then there had to be an acknowledgement of what the targeting feature did. It pointed him toward his entruster. It gave him that feeling that they were significant. So significant the universe tilted toward them a little. Also, when I target someone the feeling isn't forceful. Now that he considered it, that was interesting. He felt pokes and pinches when other avowed targeted him, but he didn't think he pinched back the same way with his own targeting. Maybe Kibby would be able to tell him what it felt like for sure the next time he saw her. But on his end of things, at least, it was a more receptive process. Like I'm opening myself up or holding out a hand. Should I try imagining it's something with roots that opens and tracks things? It's pretty special. It keeps me connected to my entruster over long distances. Alden fixed his mind on his sense of Hoyu. Alright, so if I wanted to acknowledge and strengthen this part of the skill then. It had never occurred to him to try targeting someone more by manipulating his bound authority. For one thing, it didn't seem necessary. His targeted person was targeted, and he could protect things they entrusted him with. It was such a basic part of the skill that it had gone overlooked. He worked at it for a while, growing engrossed just as he had on his last night in intake when he'd first started reimagining the affixation. Eventually, as he'd hoped, focusing intently on even a small part of the skill like this helped him align himself with the whole thing. By the time he'd discovered a way of thinking that helped him become a little more receptive to his target and increase his awareness of Hoyu's location, he felt relaxed and more at home with himself. My entruster is there, he thought. Now where's the thing he told me to preserve? He stood and left the room. Eyes still closed, he turned and walked a few steps to the end of the hall. He was careful to keep his thoughts quiet. If he took time to question it, he was sure he would lose it. It needed to be more like an instinct for now. He bent and his fingers closed around something, preserving it instantly. He opened his eyes. Of course they put my soup on the floor under the polar bear head. He carried it toward the kitchen to reheat it. All three of the other guys were in the living room. I got it, said Alden, lifting the mug. Hoyu and Lexi looked at him. Lute turned around in his chair to look, too. No eyes? Hoyu asked. Or did you just get hungry? No eyes, Alden confirmed with a grin. Then he yawned. But I am very hungry. And sleepy. That's a fun new power discovery, said Lute. I'm going to hide things you need in awkward places. To help you train. Good luck finding the toilet paper tomorrow. Thanks. You're a true friend. That took you 2 hours, Lexi said. Alden checked the time. It did. Sorry. I thought I was faster than that, but I got kind of invested in the process. He went over to the microwave. You can have fresh soup, said Hoyu. You don't have to eat the training soup. I'm going to eat the training soup and the fresh soup if you don't mind. It smells awesome. Take a selfie with your mug, Hoyu said. I'm sending them to my mom. To prove I rock at cooking. Will do. Alden watched his dinner rotate around on the glass plate. Hey. Heliotropic flowers are cool, aren't they? Huh? Said Lute. You know. Flowers that always turn to face the sun and follow it across the sky. Like daisies. They are a targeting flower. If you were gonna be a flower, you'd want to be a heliotropic one. They are pretty cool, said Hoyu. Man, you need sleep, said Loot. Were you imagining yourself as a daisy when you were trying to target your soup cup? Lexi asked slowly. Wait. Hoyu cried. Was that what you meant? Not exactly. He played around with imagining he had an origami targeting shape pointed at Hoyu. Not the soup. And it wasn't really a daisy. It was just a kind of unfolding feeling like a flower opening toward the sun that had gotten him the stronger sense of Hoyu's location that he'd wanted. What exactly did you mean then? Lexi asked. Good minestrone. I'm just doing some metaphor stuff, Lexi. Trying out everything. Approaching magic from new angles. No big deal. Is it working for you? Sometimes. It did take me 2 whole hours to find my supper though. That's forever. So maybe don't take my advice. Alden ate every bite, then he pulled the leftovers out of the fridge and refilled the mug. Loot, there's a birthday thing for Uncle Benjamin tomorrow night. It's not a huge party. Like 50 people. I'm getting an invite from Amy. Do you still want to come? Yuck, thought Alden. Yes. I'm going, Hoyu said. How many more times do you think you'll have to practice until you can reliably find your entrusted object? Lexi asked. He's got a one-track mind. You mean until I'm good at it? Alden said. I just wondered if you knew. I can reliably find it already, probably. If time isn't an issue, I'm sure I could do it again. But I'll keep practicing until I get a lot faster. I want to find a way to hit that point I was at in gym today at will instead of after half an hour of having a superhero pelt me with fastballs. How far away do you think? There's a distance limit on how far away my target can be from whatever they're entrusting me with, so not that far. Hoyu could probably tell me to go find something he left downstairs but not across campus. And he might need to have at least a general idea of where the item is himself before he can tell me to get it. We haven't tested that. That would make it way less useful for finding lost objects. But this is still a good way to train myself. And maybe I can have one of you throw some stuff at me. I'll help you with whatever you want to practice, too. Your new codename is Ball Catcher. You can go to that party alone, Loot. Cotton balls? By yourself. Chapter 119. The gleaming tip of a slender chain whip inched through the air, approaching its victim with a quiet, lethal grace. Gently, Lexi Roberts mumbled, staring at the marshmallow on the concrete floor a couple of meters away. Calmly. Lexi? You're not jogging this morning. Ruther wrapped around the marshmallow and sliced it in half, filling the apartment with a burnt sugar smell and making Hoyu Zhangdamir smile sheepishly from where he stood by a leather armchair. Sorry. You were practicing. Not like it was going well. Lexi huffed and went over to pick up the marshmallow pieces and fling them toward the trash. Don't throw them away. Hoyu protested. Toasted marshmallows are good. They've been on the floor. It's pristine. The robot vacuum cleans it every day. The bag's on the counter if you want a fresh one. You don't mind me using them for this, do you? The marshmallows? Hoyu asked. Why would I? They were on the shared food shelf. I figured you'd bought them. No. Alden did. He won't care. It seems like he is easygoing about most things. Ruther hung by Lexi's side, writhing slightly. Do you think he's? Hoyu looked at him. Do you think he's one of those people who just gets how to use his powers naturally? Lexi asked. Hoyu shrugged. I don't know. I haven't known him that long. I haven't had powers that long. He hasn't either really. It's premature to guess. I know you were thinking the same thing as me last night, Lexi said. I saw your face. When? Several times. Hoyu sighed. Okay. I was a little envious. Yes, Lexi hissed. This isn't the first, I know. We met him a little less than 3 weeks ago, and that skill of his looks vastly more impressive than it did on assessment day. It's so different than I thought it was, Lexi said. Even Khan mentioned it this past weekend, and at that point, we hadn't even seen him do whatever that was last night. The skill seems really versatile. I'm glad for him. Stop worrying about your own progress so much. You're doing great. Rather's supposed to be versatile, too. But it randomly attacks. It was a tiny scratch. It was right after you first got it, and Khan wasn't even mad about it. I don't want the deadly weapon I'm responsible for to scratch my brother. It's responding to your mood. That's not a good thing for it to respond to. I mean, it's responding to your mood right now. It just singed the edge of the fluffy rug. Lexi swore in Russian, and ran over to stomp on the smoldering spot while Rather withdrew. Hoyu walked over with a pair of scissors and started trimming the burnt fuzz out of the rug. Maybe I should get gone. It's such a thick rug. It hides mistakes like this all by itself. Lexi stared down at him. How many times have you trimmed it? Just once. There was an itty-bitty tiny little stain that wouldn't come clean. And now it's gone. Like it never happened. He snipped some more. I don't think Alden's had the opportunity to try most of the things with his skill that he's trying now. He wasn't surrounded by older avowed when he affixed who could take him to safe places and let him experiment. And even though he's leveled, I doubt he was in the mood to take creative risks when he was stuck in a situation where mistakes would get him killed. If you think about it that way, it's natural for him to be finding a ton of new things he can do all at once. I know. Still. Last night it took him 2 hours to find the soup. Right. And he was like, oh no, that's such a long time. After the first time I activated Rather's phase-out feature, it took me a week to get it to do it again. Hoyu stood up with a fistful of trimmings. It was his certainty that he could do it reliably from now on that stung my ego. But maybe he's figuring his skill out so fast because he's been through bad stuff with it. I considered that. So stop comparing your pace to his. He's just got interesting circumstances. After you've been summoned to another planet for months, then you can worry you're slow. Lexi was quiet. Then he said, when do you think it'll happen for us? Late uni maybe? If we both level as fast as we hope to. Unless some wizard who knows our parents decides to request us for a job out of curiosity. Are you seriously going to that party tonight? Yes. It's not that much trouble. And Luke needs support. You're coming too. No, I'm not. We'll see. I'm not. Line of asterisks, the rabbit's interest in. Morrison, I hope you're talking about a cute animal or the zodiac right now and not one of our students, Celeste said as she phased her hand through the top of the mini fridge beside her bed and pulled out a bottle of water. Students are work. And I don't discuss work when I'm not fully clothed. Morrison Waker rolled over to grin at her. You were just telling me about the time you shoved your hand through a meister to punch the brute behind him. I'm retired from being Gustin. Old work isn't work anymore. Alden Thurin is current work. Current work is off limits when I'm naked or when the person I'm talking to is naked. Good policy. She twisted the cap off the bottle, drained half of it, and then passed the rest to him. He sat up to take it. When you're not Big Snake or Little Snake, do people ever call you Medium Snake? He shook his head. Hardly ever get around to being my natural self in front of strangers these days. I like you this way. You look more like when we first met. I can look exactly like when we first met if you want. Right down to the mullet. She tossed her hair over her shoulder. Not that I don't appreciate the possibilities of your morphing, but let's keep it simple for our first time trying this. You're the boss, he said happily. Then he gasped in false horror. Wait. You really are my boss now. I'm sleeping with my boss. She slapped his thigh. This is terrible. I'm being taken advantage of. If you don't mind, I'm going to take advantage of you a little bit more. Sometime later, as the lights in the room gradually brightened to indicate the arrival of morning, they lay staring at one another across the rumpled expanse of the sheets. Was this a just-in-case-you-die-out-there kind of night? He asked. Or something else? I'm happy either way, and I don't like to assume. Come back home safely so we can talk about it more, she said. It was that kind of night. There are a lot of people here on Earth who would miss you if you were gone. He nodded. Will do. You want me to sneak off before your daughter wakes up, Do you need to head home and pack? Nope. Got a bag stashed in system storage. Then stay for breakfast. She'll be excited to have company, and she's too young to care about why the company is here first thing in the morning. But be prepared to hear a lot about treehouses. I read her a bedtime story with one in it and now she wants one. Who doesn't? Morrison, do you know how hard it is to find a house with a yard with a treehouse appropriate tree on this island? After they dressed, while the coffee was brewing, he said, "So. The rabbit." Leslie sighed. "We've got clothes on. And this really is interesting. He can use that skill of his with his eyes closed. Why wouldn't he be able to?" Morrison examined the selection of coffee cups and picked one with red stripes. "I mean he can use it to catch things out of the air and freeze them without opening his eyes to see what's coming his way. Saw it plain as day, but I still reviewed the video after class just to make sure." Her expression changed. "See? You were interested. I'm surprised. I've put quite a lot of thought into his skill, given the situation. An ability like that is beyond my expectations for its development. He still has to target the person throwing stuff at him, so that drives Torsten insane. We all know the skill vanished from the list after Alden chose it. But even if it's experimental, the thing he calls entrustment seems like a pointless limiter on a fairly harmless power. Luna Plum thinks it's the most wonderful mystery. She's trying to find other skills with similarly impractical requirements. How many levels do you think he'd have to get on the one skill before he can catch bullets with it? You want the B-rank rabbit to be a bullet catcher? I want to see him get something worthwhile for his troubles. He's had it rough. Line of asterisks on the rooftop of a mirrored, cube-shaped building that stood by itself, reflecting nothing but the endlessness of the sky and the waves. A woman looked east toward the place where Earth's newly risen sun hid behind thick gray clouds. Her brown hair hung down her back in 3 braids, cuffed together with wooden hoops. The uniform she wore was decorated with metal studs, and the fabric of her coat was a pale shade of green that one of the humans on the residence levels below her had said might be called sea foam in his language. She was slightly disappointed that the sea air had not produced foam in a similar color since she'd arrived. This is a lonely place on such a lively planet, she thought. But she did not feel alone. She smiled and a minute later, her partner appeared on the roof beside her. "Lind, you've been out here for hours," he complained. "I think you're doing it just to see if I'll miss you." "Did you?" "A little. Isn't that absurd? I've never been more aware of your presence. You'd think it would make me less inclined to follow you onto cold rooftops, but here I am." His own hair, so dark it was almost true black, was braided to match hers. He crossed his arms over his chest and shivered dramatically. "Are you quite serious, Esh?" she said in an amused tone. "The last time we visited the first rapport there was a blizzard, and I didn't notice you complaining about the weather then. I was complaining in the privacy of my mind. I'll make sure you notice it next time." He looked toward the horizon. "What are you out here for?" "Late in the night I felt something unusual. I wanted to get some distance from the humans to think about it." He waited. "An authority greeting," she said. "But such a quiet, undirected one. As if they didn't seek an answer." "I didn't notice it. You were observing the Avowed in their training. And as I said, it was very quiet. Let's send a message to all of the Unbound here on Earth and demand that the person sending out random hellos confess," he suggested. "The mystery would be solved in moments." She laughed. "You cruel man. You'll have some frightened person convinced we're angry with them. We will tell them that their strange behavior distracted you from your work. Let's leave whoever they are alone." There was something charming about their greeting. It was why I was curious in the first place. Speaking of curiosities, I asked the local contract for the profiles of all commended Avowed on this planet. She turned to him. "Were you going to invite them over for socializing, training, or work?" He lifted his hands. "I just don't know what to do with myself when you're hiding on roofs and there are no disasters in progress. I thought if there was someone very interesting who wasn't already here we might ask them to stop by. Come over. Enjoy the chaos miasma with us." Her tone was wry. Yes. Something like that. Do you remember that story we heard about Alisart finding a human on Thagund? He said. Of course. Because of that experience, he has the highest commendation of any human avowed. O 13-year-old Riebi boy. Isn't that interesting? It is, she agreed. Very interesting. And disturbing. He must be a remarkable child. I do hope he's resting well now that he has made it back home. Line of asterisks. Alden Thorne dropped out of his bed, and his feet hit the rug beneath him with a thump. He could hear the quiet sounds of Lexi and Hoyu having a conversation in the living room. And the shower running meant Lute was already up, too. Nice, he thought. I slept a reasonable number of hours. His message's light was blinking. Hoyu, good morning, everyone. Happy Vora Mafia Infiltration Day. Let's talk about our goals. Chapter 120. Alden. What an apex did you just pull out of your bag? Lute asked, blinking at the object in Alden's hand as the four roommates approached the alleyway where Benjamin Vora's birthday party was being held. It was 6 o'clock in the evening, and they were in an apex neighborhood Alden had never been to before. It was known for its nightlife, according to the others, but it was too early for there to be much evidence of that. It's a present. Alden held up a box covered in Riebi wrapping paper. Aren't we supposed to bring gifts? It's a birthday party, and we invited ourselves. Benjamin's turning 70, said Lute. Adults still get birthday presents, don't they? I didn't bring anything, Lexi said. But you should have, Lute. He's your uncle. Seriously? Look. He made the bow out of origami paper, said Hoyu. What do you even get for a 70-year-old millionaire you've never met? Lexi asked. It's a sleep mask. I bought 3 different ones to try, and I haven't used this one yet. Lute, I guess it fits in with your persona, Cottontail. Alden bit back a sigh. Lute's goals for the night were simple enough. First, he wanted to make a reappearance in front of his family in the least suspicious way possible. Which means pretending I want something from them, he had said, since none of them would believe it if I just started longing for their company after all this time. To this end, he would be dropping hints about wanting to show Libra off to his roommates. Ideally, this would eventually lead to them all being invited to the Megayacht, which was high on the list of locations Lute wanted to search for evidence of his grandmother's criminality. Secondly, he wanted to cozy up to some cousins who had complaints about Alaya and see if they dropped any interesting information. If it was the kind of party where the mocktails weren't so muck, we'd probably have more luck, he explained as they walked. But Uncle Benjamin is a person who feels like he's done something wild when he orders more than one thing from a dessert menu. It'll be a good starter event for you, Lexi. Why are you mentioning me specifically? Lexi asked in a suspicious voice. You seem like you need easing into your role more than the other two, hushing Russian. No. That's the 11th codename you've refused. Cottontail has accepted his with grace, and Faux Cooker made up a good one all by himself. Alden, Hoyu, and Lexi were supposed to be their normal selves if yourselves were more normal according to Lute. Apparently, he had little faith in their acting abilities, so he had spent his time in class today making character sheets for each of them. Lute, remember, Cottontail, you're... Alden, not a fan of socializing, but grateful that Alaya gave me a bunch of money and flattered that she has been sending me emails. Instead of weirded out and wary. Lute nodded. I've been told that normal people like it when my grandmother wants to shower them with attention and gifts. Alden, I'm not sure you're right about those people being normal, but I'll go with it. Hoyu, I'm a typical teenager who has come to this party because parties are awesome, and I'm finally old enough to do whatever I want. I'm a party animal who definitely doesn't want to run over Alaya Vora with a car. And I just came along because I have nothing better to do with my life on a Tuesday night than make sure you three don't stay out too late and get in trouble, Lexi said sarcastically. There's the place, Lute interrupted, gesturing toward a curtain of glimmering stars that obscured the entrance to the alleyway from view. He stopped to adjust the eye patch he was wearing, a plain black one today. He kept on adjusting it for longer than was normal. You know, Alden said, if this thing sucks we can leave anytime. True, said Hoyu. As a party animal, I only animal at the best parties. So if this one isn't the best, we all have homework we should be doing, Lexi added. Lute stopped fiddling around with the eye patch. Come, my entourage, he said. I'm going to get myself a yacht trip. Lute, and by yacht trip, I mean justice. Hoyu glanced at Alden. Do you think this is a bad idea? He asked via private message. I can't actually tell, Alden admitted. I think it might be the kind of thing where if he takes a stab at it once or twice, he'll feel better even if it goes nowhere. And all I have to do is mingle with some people who will probably annoy me. How bad can it really be? Line of asterisks. The decorations at the party were impressive enough that even Lexi and Hoyu, who were much more used to having magic around them for special events than Alden was, stopped for a moment after they entered the alley to admire the location. Hoyu whistled. Are those dumpsters oozing something that looks like molten gold? Lexi asked. I thought you said your uncle had boring taste? Alden examined the graffiti on the wall beside him. It looked like ordinary spray paint, but every time he blinked, it changed. A happy birthday message disappeared to be replaced by a long green tongue wrapping around a lollipop. If this is boring, I'm concerned about what you think of me. He does have boring taste. But some of his kids planned this thing. So they included stuff they thought was cool. According to Amy, the theme is glitter and grunge. Luke reached up to shove an opalescent, basketball-sized bubble away from his face, but as soon as his fingers touched it, it burst. A cloud of metallic confetti flew outward, showering them all, and a sparkling choker hit the pavement. That is custom jewelry, isn't it? Lexi asked, staring down at the necklace. The answer came not from Lute, but from a boy who'd just stepped through the star curtain behind them. If you find a set of earrings or a watch, those are real. Everything else is just rhinestones. Hello, Lute. Hi, Roman, Lute said in a guarded tone. What are you doing here? Roman asked. He had dark, slightly curly hair and magnetic deep-set eyes. His voice was ear-catching and enjoyable in a way that Alden had learned to recognize as a feature of some people's high appeal. Are you coming to get your eye back? But even the appeal can't make something like that sound less disturbing. Alden, Hoyu, and Lexi were all frozen. Lute's expression blanked. You do know it's not on the shelf in Grandma's closet, don't you? It got sliced and diced. It was the exploded remnants of an eyeball. Medical waste. I can't get it back. So bad so soon. Very awkwardness. How do I party animal now? Hoyu's hands were in his pockets, so it was a pure mental texting effort. He sent it to both Alden and Lexi. You're pretty good at that, Alden replied. You should do mental more. As for the answer to Hoyu's question, he had no idea. I feel bad for you though, said Roman. I keep thinking, what if it was my eye? It almost could have been. And everyone says you won't get a new one because you're just being stubborn to hurt Aunt Jessica's feel. Hi, I'm Alden. He thrust his hand toward Lute's cousin. I'm a rabbit, too. We must have so much in common. As rabbits. He tried to cover his wince with a smile. What the heck, brain? You couldn't think of anything else to say to interrupt the conversation. Before Roman could shake his hand, Hoyu stuck his own out. I'm Hoyu. You can think of me as a party badger. Lexi crossed his arms over his chest. Is it all right if we hit the bubbles with Meister weapons? Roman Volra squinted at all three of them, then turned to Lute with a questioning look. These are my roommates, said Lute. If they were normal, they would have introduced themselves as my roommates. I'm his roommate, said Alden. Me too, Hoyu said. Yes, that's right. We're also his friends, Hoyu added. Yeah, we don't just live with him, said Alden, we actually like him. They both turned to Lexi. He hogs the bathtub. All right, Lute said, clapping his hands together once. Roommates introduced. It was all very normal. Why don't you three go eat something? Roman, do you know where Olaya is right now? As they left Lute to his relatives, Hoyu said, Did he tell us to go eat just so that our mouths would be full and we couldn't talk to anyone? Probably. What's a party badger? Alden asked. I was trying to figure out what kind of party animal I should be. I didn't mean to say it out loud. Another confetti explosion hit them, and they looked over to see Lexi picking up a rhinestone tiara. I didn't use rather, he said defensively. We weren't judging you, Hoyu said. I'm going to pop every single one of those things that drifts near me, Alden agreed. Line of asterisks. They clung together for the first 20 minutes of the party, as more Vulras and friends of Vulras arrived. Alden intended to keep clinging to the people he knew were safe, but when he took a moment to set his present down on a table that held a large chocolate cake, he found himself abandoned. Lexi was weaving through party guests, stocking a particularly large confetti bubble with an intense look on his face that would suit him well if he was ever trying to strike fear into the heart of, well, anyone. And Hoyu had been caught up in conversation by a girl who might be Luke's cousin Mio. He was about to text to ask Hoyu if he wanted to be rescued, when a pair of hands landed on his shoulders from behind. Salutations. Long time no see. Uneven. The gremlin was so petulant when it conveyed the idea, too. It was convinced Alden was currently attending a party full of sinners. We've talked about this so many times. Word chains get paid back. It's not like all of these Vulras have reneged on half a dozen sacred contracts since this morning. They are just carrying debt. He turned around to face the person who'd grabbed him. Amy, he said warily. Hello. She was wearing a red mini dress, a lot of custom jewelry, and a broad smile. You lived, she said. Good job. Well, that's one way to acknowledge what happened without making it too gloomy. Thank you. You used my hot tub. And you came to a family party with loot. You're one of my cousins now. Nope. Did you bring a present? She was looking around him to see the package on the table. That's great. We said no gifts on the invitations, because that's what we did last year and the year before that and the year before that. But then I think Dad was sad about it this year because 70 is a round number. Or something. I'll take this to him. That was painless enough, thought Alden as she swept off with the gift. One Vulra successfully interacted with. Now, where did the mood of the crowd in the alleyway shifted. It wasn't dramatic, but Alden still noticed. The chatter of voices stopped drowning out the music. Someone standing at a wooden spool table nearby spilled their drink. A couple of tiny drones reared up into the air at their owner's commands, and a few too many heads turned at once toward the entrance. Alden followed their gazes and caught his first real-life glimpse of Alaya Vulra. She looks better than in pictures. He'd assumed she would. Powerful superhumans were like that. Their morenas came across clearer in person than on film. He just hadn't expected her to look different in quite the way she did. Stately and intimidating, that was what he had imagined she would be like at first, because she was old and political and rich. Then he'd heard Luke's story, and he'd known that wasn't right. But he still hadn't quite reached the conclusion he drew now, within seconds of seeing her walk into the party. Her arms were spread wide to greet a very young boy, no doubt one of her many grandchildren, who ran toward her excitedly. Alaya squeezed the little boy in a hug, kissed him on the forehead, and then pointed up at the highest of the flying bubbles. He nodded, and she winked at him. An instant later, the elastic band holding her brownish blonde hair up in a very perky ponytail was in her hand. As her hair spilled down her back, she looped one end of the band around her thumb and drew the other taut. Then she shot it at the bubble. A second later, confetti rained down and the boy dashed toward the falling prize. And Alaya was already moving through the party, altering it around her with every step she took. She pointed at someone's cup and asked a question, and they offered her a sip of their drink. After she swallowed it, she smiled, then she gestured to a man passing by wearing a giant necklace. She called out a joke. He blinked, then guffawed. Alaya tossed her head back and laughed with him. She moved on, shaking a hand here, stealing a bacon-wrapped jalapeno from a partygoer's plate there. Fully on theme, she was wearing work boots and coveralls artfully smeared with gold paint and what looked like oil. Even knowing the things he knew, Alden couldn't overcome the impression that Sleyca was one of the most alive people he'd ever seen. She was vibrant, and even though people were parting to get out of her way or trailing along in her wake in hopes of gaining her notice, it didn't feel like she was controlling them. It looked like she belonged there, right at the heart of things. Alden had wondered how she could keep winning elections when she apparently had so many enemies. Now I know. He was so focused on her that it took him a minute to take in the people who'd arrived with her. They were afterthoughts, decorative backdrop for the star of the show. Lute's mother was there. Jessica Vola's appearance was so noteworthy and so fresh in Alden's mind that she was the first one he saw after Sleyca. She was just a step behind, her white blonde braid hanging over her shoulder. She was in a shredded skirt and blouse that looked more like a zombie apocalypse costume than anything else, and her eyes were flitting between one of her smartwatches and her cell phone. If there's one person at this party I have to avoid at all costs, it's her. He was less worried about her recognizing him from their brief encounter the other night than he was about the fact that he had no idea how to talk to her. It was like Hoyu had said. Lute was angry with Jessica, but it seemed like a really conflicted sort of anger. Alden understood that he was supposed to say hello to Sleyca, be polite and dull, make sure she didn't know he was freaked out by the fact that she believed they were fated to interact, that kind of thing. But he'd been given zero advice for how to deal with Jessica. And he hadn't asked because he didn't know how to ask. Hey, Lute. Your mom betrayed your trust and stole your choices about your future. She's scary and pitiable at the same time. She's your mom. You love her. Am I supposed to be nice to her or yell at her for you? He mentally drew a big X over Jessica and promised himself he'd run away if she came toward him regardless of how it would look. See. A plan. I can handle Vola's. And there's Hazel. It wasn't like Alden was surprised to see her, but he was sure a frown crossed his face when he did. Maybe I should have taken the word chain from Lute after all. Lute had offered to dole out the word chain that Alden was currently learning. Self-mastery, gracefulness, my body becomes my servant, whatever they wanted to call it, there were some nice uses for it in social contexts. Alden had refused on the grounds that a party sounded both boring and full of annoyances, which was a bad combo with a heightened bodily awareness. Lute did fine with it, but Lute had had a lot of practice. It would be good to have conscious control over all of my facial expressions. But it's probably better to make a funny face or two instead of bottling up a bunch of discomfort behind a placid smile until I set my clothes on fire and yell at people for talking loudly. Hazel was near the back of the group that had arrived with Sleyca. She was wearing a tight, shiny silver dress and a matching flapper headband. Instead of adding something grimy to her own look, she had brought along a boy to be the grunge to her glitter. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and he was smeared with what appeared to be plain old dirt. Like he'd found a fresh flower bed to roll in right before he arrived. Alden couldn't criticize. He was in chinos and a button-down because Lute either hadn't known or hadn't seen fit to tell anyone that people would be in costume for this thing. Hoyu, who had decided a party animal would take advantage of all aspects of the party, was attaching costume jewelry to himself every time a bubble popped near him, and he'd pinned an ugly rhinestone brooch to Alden's shirt. Hazel's boyfriend looks familiar. He assumed that was who the dirt-smeared boy was anyway. She beckoned him with a finger when he trailed too far behind her, though, and it seemed weirdly commanding. So who knew? Corinne Vola was hovering around Sleyca as well. A man and woman Alden was guessing were probably Hugh and Katie, based on Lute's descriptions, were near her, too. And? Alden, Lute, your grandma just spotted you. He saw Hoyu peering over Miyo's shoulder to check out the situation. Lexi, so far down the alley now that he looked like he was trying to escape from the party altogether, turned around to see. The warning wasn't necessary for Lute, though. A moment ago, he'd been talking to a woman who was sitting at a table by herself. Now, he was standing at the end of the buffet that had been set up in the middle of the passage, with his back straight and his arms loose at his sides. His eye was fixed on Sleyca. And her eyes were fixed on him. Both of their faces were suddenly opaque. Hoyu, it's like a western. It wasn't the most obvious comparison, But Alden got what he meant. If Aliyah and Lute had been wearing cowboy hats, he would have expected them to draw pistols on each other. "That's him," a man leaning against a wall nearby muttered under his breath to the woman beside him. "The newest Vulva rank. Guess he's not a family member?" The moment stretched, and a tension that Alden didn't think he was imagining filled the alley. Then Aliyah smiled. She waved at Lute like they were friends encountering each other casually on the street, and almost everything went back to the way it had been. Chatter, music, confetti raining down. Almost everything. Jessica wasn't moving through the crowd with Aliyah anymore. She was just standing there, staring at her son. Lute watched her for a second, then turned his back and snatched a plate from the buffet. "Let's go back him up." Hoyu was suddenly at Alden's shoulder, wearing a pair of oversized rhinestone-studded glasses and a determined expression. "Faux Cooker and Cottontail are on duty. If we are not careful, those names are going to spread and stick. No. Not mine anyway. If a name like Faux Cooker ever started to gain public traction for me, my parents' agents would damage control it out of existence. Too comedic, violent, and confusing." He headed toward Lute, and Alden joined him. "Grab a plate," Lute said lightly. "There's paper and china to choose from. The china can be weaponized more easily in an emergency, so I'm taking one of those," Hoyu said. Alden had been reaching for paper, but he changed his mind. "You're planning to throw plates at people?" Lute asked. "It's not a plan. More of a precaution." Lute was spooning caviar onto his plate beside a mound of potato chips. "Where'd Lexi go?" Alden glanced around. "It looks like he was making his way over to us, but Roman caught him. That should be interesting. Roman's not sure if he's forgiven my grandmother or not yet. His resolve is weak, but he wants to discuss how he feels about it all apparently. And Lexi's so good at talking about feelings." Hoyu paused in the act of reaching for some of the chips. "It'll be fine." He didn't have a lot of confidence in his voice. Alden was too busy keeping one eye on Aliyah, who was approaching them slowly but surely, to pay attention to what he filled his own plate with. By the time Lute's grandmother reached the buffet table, he looked down to realize he had grabbed nothing he could actually eat except for a large number of radishes from the crudité platter. "I am a normal guy who has not been avoiding her like the plague since I made it back to Earth. A simple radish enjoyer who is much less interesting than she thinks." "Lute," Aliyah said, smiling charmingly at him as she bypassed the plates and grabbed a sesame bonbon. "How are you, dear? It's been months." "I've been worse," Lute said. Alden had wondered how exactly Lute would interact with her. Apparently he was going for a neutral tone. I guess he thought warmth would be fake and hostility wouldn't fit with his supposed reason for being here. "And I heard a little rumor that you'd moved back onto campus at Chelena North." "Yes." Lute gestured toward Alden and Hoyu. "These are my roommates. Guys, this is my grandmother, Aliyah. No need for introductions. I think we all recognize each other." She stepped forward and patted Hoyu on the arm. "Hoyu, it's wonderful to meet you. I hardly ever get the chance to have a real conversation with your parents, but every time I run into them, they mention you." "Thank you," said Hoyu, smiling like he hadn't ever had a single unkind thought about her. "They like me a lot. As it should be." Next, she turned to Alden. "Alden, I'm so glad you've joined us. And you're in school with my grandson. I couldn't be happier about that. How are you settling into life here on our little avowed oasis?" He decided at the last minute not to try for a smile. Hoyu was too good at faking. He'd suffer in comparison. "I'm doing pretty well," he said. "I'm glad to be in school again, and learning my way around in Eudora has been fun. But it's been an overwhelming year." Aliyah shook her head sympathetically. "I can't even imagine. Listen, if you need anything at all, call me. Your messages will come right through. After what you've been through. You have a friend here. More than one. I feel we Vulras have a bit of a connection with you. Isn't that right?" The entourage was nodding. "I know you and I are personally so grateful to you," the curvy brunette woman said, reaching out with a hand to shake Alden's. "Hazel is, too. She is Katie, then." She was also less than subtle. The Blurras weren't supposed to mention that he'd given Hazel Chainer in front of Hugh. They didn't know he knew. Hugh and Corin were nodding. Alden shook hands with them. Quick. Painless. This is going well. Do I shake hands with Hazel? They'd already met. He didn't want to. He aimed for her probable boyfriend first, so he could think about it a second longer, only for the other teenager to take a couple of steps back. Alden looked at his own hand in bewilderment. It's not dirty or anything. He switched to a wave. Nice to meet you. The boy looked embarrassed, so maybe he hadn't meant to retreat. We've met, he said. I mean not really, but I know who you are anyway. I'm Jacob. Alden blinked. No Anisidran accent, plus his age, plus vaguely familiar equaled. Were we in intake together? Jacob is a C-rank Globie, Hazel said. That seemed like an odd way to introduce your boyfriend, but Alden was too busy trying to figure out where and when he might actually have seen this person to worry about it. There were thousands of teenagers in intake at any given time, so it wasn't like he'd gotten to know even a small fraction of them. He's alright, Hazel added. Oh. He is the runaway. Alden hadn't met Jacob. But the boy had been pointed out by others on more than one occasion as a curiosity, the guy who kept stealing boats and getting dragged back. Everyone had thought he was going to be put in secure housing, but he'd supposedly calmed down enough that it hadn't been necessary. How did someone like that end up going to parties with Hazel Blurra? Alden felt someone target him. He was in a small crowd. It could have been anyone for any number of reasons, most of them harmless. But his eyes automatically met Hazel's brown ones. She wasn't wearing the smile she'd had at the funeral or that day when she'd called in his peace of mind. She looked annoyed and unhappy. If that's you, good luck screwing me over again, thought Alden. I'm debt free right now. She glanced away from him. It's partially your fault I had to go through an hours-long fear session about Kibby's future, followed by an emotional breakdown in front of Bo. I would probably have had my peace of mind ready to spend that day if not for you. I wouldn't have had to cast it again. Or, at least, I wouldn't have had to pay the bad halfback right away if I wasn't worried about you sniping me with your skill when I was out in public. You suck, Hazel. An elbow nudged him, and he snapped out of it to see Hugh giving him a questioning look. Great. I was glaring. Alden, sorry. I don't like her. Hugh, big shocking to me. Such a friendly face you wear. He rolled his eyes for emphasis. Alden wished more people would boldly attempt mental texting before they'd mastered it. The messages were fun to read. Lexi, someone come here and make this Roman person leave me alone. Alden, it hasn't even been 5 minutes. Can't you handle him for 5 minutes? Lexi, I'd rather let Rather handle him. Hugh's eyes widened. Wow, the snacks are so good. He said. Let me take some to my friend. Alden was going to follow him, but before he could, Aliyah popped the last bite of the bonbon in her mouth, brushed off her hands, and said, You know, Alden, Hazel will be starting university at Chelena North in a couple of months. Maybe you two could get together and explore the campus sometime. Give her the full tour once you've learned your way around. That would be so lovely. Wouldn't it, Hazel? Katie said encouragingly. I think so, said Corin. Our Hazel's very accomplished, said Hugh. She's spent so much time on the Triplanets. I'm sure you two would have a lot in common. Except for Jessica, who was still staring at loot from over by the brick wall of the alleyway, and Jacob, who was inching away from the group little by little, like he was hoping he could make it over to the nearest dumpster to hide. The whole entourage was looking at Hazel now. She hitched a smile onto her face and nodded at Alden. I would love that. The foreboding was so heavy it was almost crushing. One little campus tour wouldn't kill him, but if he said yes, all of these people might think sending Hazel in as Alden's very own Blurra family outreach person was the way to go forevermore. Aliyah probably assumes it's totally natural. Loot's a loose cannon in her mind, and here's Hazel being the right age and... Wait. What if she doesn't just think I'm important to the Blurra family in general? What if she thinks I'm important to Hazel specifically since I brought her Chainer? Hazel had already popped up in a very unwelcome fashion once. Alden didn't want it to become a regular thing. He turned to Lute, pleading for help with his eyes, and Lute coughed. "Don't matchmake my roommate with a random family member within 2 minutes of meeting him. It's weird." Hazel looked at him like he was a bug. Katie and Hugh looked at him like he was the devil. Corin sputtered something about nonsense, and Alaya chuckled and shook her head fondly. "Oh dear. Don't let our Lute scare you off, Alden. I was just suggesting a friendly arrangement. I'd ask him to give his cousin a little tour, but—" She lowered her voice in a conspiratorial whisper. "They haven't always gotten along. One too many childish insults exchanged over the years. They'll laugh about it one day when they're as old as I am." Lute's mouth tightened, and his cheeks reddened. It wasn't much. Alden couldn't tell if he was angry to have his conflict with his cousin reduced to childish insults or if he was just flustered to have his grandmother lightly disparage him in front of a friend. Whatever the case, he got a handle on himself quickly, his face turning bored as he scooped caviar up with one of his chips. He's going to let it go. There was no reason not to. It was the tiniest of digs, if it could even be considered a dig at all. Alaya wasn't saying it to hurt anyone. She was using it to smooth over their current conversation. And probably to make a polite excuse to cover for anything Lute might have told me about Hazel. The easy thing to do is let it go. "It's fine," said Alden. "Lute's only trying to help me out. The thing is—" He hesitated. Breaking social norms intentionally wasn't something he did. It hadn't occurred to him to do it until right this second, and he hadn't thought it through well. All the Valras were staring at him with varying degrees of interest. Alaya's smile was so warm and inviting it was practically begging for him to take her into his confidence. She probably didn't mean for it to result in this. "The thing is, I don't want to be around you, Hazel." Alden heard himself deliver the words bluntly. "I don't feel comfortable with you near me. A few weeks ago when you were trying to get my attention, a word chain that would have made me more open to talking to you came due before it should have. And it's not like I can prove it was you, but I do think it was. I'm sorry if I'm falsely accusing you, but I'm really not okay with a stranger deciding on a whim that I should take a dose of a mood alterer for her convenience." Except for what sounded like Lute choking to death on his chips behind Alden, there was silence from the little group. And Keikovalra, who'd been walking by with a slice of cake as Alden had started speaking, had stopped to stare at them all. Hugh, Katie, and Corin looked utterly aghast. Hazel's face had frozen so completely that Alden had no idea what she was feeling other than shock. Alaya's expression had gone just as opaque as it had upon first spotting Lute. "I'm sorry," Alden said to Alaya. "I'm grateful to you. And to you, Keiko. Remember, Lute's character sheet for more normal Alden says I am grateful and flattered." He looked over to the chainer superhero, who gave him a confused nod. "I bought a coat that probably saved my life with the money you guys gave me for the class trade. Even if it is the thing that got me in trouble in the first place, it was still really useful. And Emmy seems fun. And Lute's been an amazing roommate." The amazing roommate was still choking. Did he need help back there? "So I hope I'm not offending anybody here," Alden continued. "But I'm going to pass on hanging out with Hazel." "You can't prove anything," Hazel's mother said wildly. "Young man," Corin exclaimed. "To accuse my granddaughter of such a— I'm not trying to prove anything." Alden felt surprisingly calm in the face of Hazel's family being so upset. "I don't have to. I don't even want to. I'm just saying that an unwelcome word chain-related thing happened right as I ran into one of the only chainers in the universe. It's made me suspicious of that person." Hazel's mother started to say something else, but Hazel interrupted her. "I'm very sorry you would assume something so awful about me." Her words were steady, but at her sides, her hands were clenched in the currently silver fabric of her dress. "Obviously I can't do anything to defend myself. We chainers don't make our profiles public, so I can't even show you my skill. It doesn't do anything like what you're suggesting." For a second, Alden felt a stab of doubt. It would be mortifying if I was totally wrong about her doing it. There are multiple flashing signs pointing to her, and Lute all but confirmed it, but perhaps if you can't trust me, you can consider my qualifications, Hazel said, standing taller. I have been formally recognized for my responsible chaining by the Artonans themselves. You know I am an authorized witness. I have been since before I was even an avowed. Do you really think they just hand something like that out to untrustworthy people? Most of the chainers in the family are authorized witnesses, Hazel, Luke chimed in. It doesn't come with a halo. She glared at him. You, Hazel, Aliyah said in a sharp voice, I'm very embarrassed by you right now. Apologize to Alden. Alden blinked. The entourage seemed to be holding their breath all of a sudden. Hazel stared at her grandmother in shock. Why would I apologize when there's no proof I did any? Aliyah silenced her with a look. No proof? We all know what your skill does. Do you expect the whole family to stand here behind you and back you up while you lie to someone about one of your misjudgments? Hugh made a sound of protest, but it was so soft Aliyah didn't even bother to acknowledge it. Instead, she looked back at Alden. I'm so sorry, dear. As Hazel says, the family doesn't share their profiles. Unfortunately, conducting chainer business to the best of our abilities demands a certain amount of discretion from us. She said it as if the need for secrecy was an inconvenience to her, too, rather than an idea she'd cooked up on her own. But under these circumstances, I can't imagine leaving you in the dark. Hazel's skill does in fact do what you suspect. Loot. Omission. Yes. It's a simple ability that, how shall I put it? It gently ushers a chain toward its debtor. Grandma, you can't just. Hazel looked stricken. It seems my granddaughter has been almost unforgivably selfish. Of course it will never happen again. What word chain was it? Alden was thrown off guard. Not having planned this all out, he didn't know what he would have expected Aliyah's reaction to be to his accusation if he'd had time to consider it. But it wasn't this. And Hazel, Hugh, and Corin's faces said they were way more horrified by this outcome than seemed normal. It was peace of mind, he said slowly. I see, said Aliyah. A wonderful chain. One of the most popular ones in the universe in fact. Corin and Hugh blanched. Katie was wringing her hands. From the corner of his eye, Alden noted that Keiko had a sort of ready-to-pounce look about her. Like if something went too horribly wrong she was prepared to break it up. Popular is bad. Because the chain is super healthy. He guessed. So there's even less reason for her to usher the debt toward me than there would have been otherwise. He assumed Hazel's ushering initiated a word chain's debt repayment in a way that was less costly to the chain than the usual automatic snapback that came if you just went too long without saying the other half. It might make sense for the Palace of Unbreaking to create a skill like that. Loot, Aliyah was saying now, if you knew about this you should have told me right away. Should I have? Of course. Do you think I would have let this situation stand for a single moment? Loot didn't answer. Hazel, said Aliyah, apologize. Her expression looked like it had the power to pin people to walls. The entourage certainly wasn't moving. Even Jessica and Jacob were locked in place. And the effect expanded outward as more people at the party realized a drama of some kind was unfolding. A few guests who'd started to approach the buffet for food had changed their minds. Hazel, though, didn't look pinned. Her face was flushed, and her hands were shaking. And it didn't look like embarrassment. She looks really pissed off. You just announced my skill. She cried. It's supposed to be private. You just told him. You kind of told him first, Loot muttered. Hazel didn't seem to hear him. Her attention was all on Aliyah now. It's supposed to be a secret. It's supposed to be mine. How could you do this to me? Aliyah tapped her own chin with a slender finger and looked up in mock thoughtfulness. Someone who wants to keep her talents a secret should perhaps consider not using them against our family friends. I am your granddaughter. Hazel shouted. I am your protege. I've done everything you ever asked me to, and you gave my yes to that whiny, lazy little whiff the second he was selected. Hazel. Corin said in alarm. Hugh was reaching out to calm her. Katie's hands were over her own mouth. I've been working for this family for years, Hazel said, slapping her father's hand away. "Every day. All day. I've been studying for you and impressing people for you and doing the things only I can do for you, and Luke casts one little word chain right and you choose him." "Him?" She switched to her tone. "He hates you. He hates Anzidora. He can't even talk. Greater than. Are you almost through with this little fit?" Alaya asked in an icy voice. Hazel pointed at Alden, who raised his plate protectively in front of himself. Radishes rolled off the edge and hit the pavement. As the music filling the alley changed to a song that started with a screechy electric guitar solo, Hazel said, "I was just trying to get to know him for you because the same stupid superstition that makes you think Loot is special makes you think this boy matters. Do you think I want to spend time with someone like him for myself?" So the feeling's mutual. He could have had any class he wanted, and he begged to be a maid. "Hey," thought Alden. "Hey!" shouted a voice that sounded like Roman's. "Hazel, please sweetie," her mother said. "You've had a bad day. Why don't we? He's just some rude globie who got lucky, and got Janer, and now what?" The beaded tassel on her flapper headband was trembling like it was enraged, too. "We have to have him at all the family events? I have to go on tours of campuses I've already seen with him?" She jabbed the finger she was pointing at Alden through the air again. "I've been nothing but nice to you and you're the worst person I've ever met." Alden kept his mouth shut. "You left me to a fix alone. You almost sideswiped me with a bicycle and you didn't even stop to apologize. You make accusations you don't have any proof about." Alden was going to keeping his mouth shut. The Operation Odin's Revenge group chat was getting odd. Hoyu and Loot were both trying and failing to mental text, and he was receiving nothing but random words and punctuation marks. "I am the only person in the world who can do what I do. My rank doesn't matter. I do. I matter. I'm valuable on this planet and on a mother greater than. You should have been grateful someone like me reached out to you instead of complaining about a little. It was nothing. What I did made you feel good. It didn't hurt you. Why would you make a big deal out of it and humiliate me in front of everyone here?" So it was her. Having it come out of her own mouth so that he could set aside every last shred of doubt once and for all was such a relief. "If having your own behavior described in public makes you feel humiliated," said Alden, "maybe you should behave differently." Hazel seemed to have run out of words to say. She was breathing hard. Her face was shifting from anger to something more alarmed, and her eyes were darting back and forth like she was looking for the exit. Her relatives were either gaping at her or avoiding her gaze. Alaya looked her up and down just once, then she turned away and reached for another bonbon. "I don't think we should entertain Hazel's drama for a second longer," she said in a ringing voice. "Alden, have you tried the bruschetta? It's to die for." Tope continued,